we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
King Charles just had the ugliest fight with Camilla, and she earned every single bit of what is coming. She was caught doing something the palace had warned her to never go near. And this time Charles did not look away. He cut her off completely and dropped full authority directly into William and Catherine's hands. Camilla has been left with nothing, no power, no leverage, and she is absolutely livid. The moves she is making right now behind closed doors have people inside that palace genuinely frightened. Because what Camilla is quietly planning is not just a response. It is a threat to everything this monarchy has left. And the worst of it has not even started yet. The whole problem began with the fall of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the king's own brother. The 19th of February, 2026 started like any other cold winter morning in Norfolk, England. But before that day was over, the British monarchy had been dragged into the darkest crisis of its modern existence. Police cars pulled up outside a quiet country property, and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the king's own brother, was arrested on his 66th birthday. The charge was misconduct in public office. But what sat behind that charge was something so explosive it made the whole of Britain go completely still. While serving as a British trade envoy between 2010 and 2011, Andrew had allegedly been handing highly classified British government intelligence directly to Jeffrey Epstein, the American billionaire who had spent years exploiting underage girls and collecting compromising secrets about some of the most powerful men in the world. This was not a family embarrassment. This was a state security disaster wearing a royal face. Epstein was not simply a criminal. He was a predator who built an entire system around accessing, compromising, and controlling powerful people. He had powerful politicians, billionaires, and celebrities inside his orbit. And every single one of them had something they desperately did not want the world to know. That was the point. The idea that a senior British royal had been feeding this man classified government information was the kind of revelation that did not just damage reputations. It raised the terrifying question of how much damage had already been done and how many years ago it had started. That same morning, King Charles was sitting inside Buckingham Palace. His body was still being eaten alive by cancer. And his brother's arrest was burning across every television screen in Britain. But news leaked that Charles was not shocked. Not even close. According to a Radar Online insider, Charles had known the whole time. He knew what Andrew had done. He knew what Andrew was. And he looked the entire country in the face and said absolutely nothing. The most powerful family in Britain had wrapped their arms around a predator and hidden him deliberately, and the evidence underneath that claim was not thin. Intelligence officials had confirmed that Andrew's activities were under active surveillance for years, and that those surveillance reports had been delivered directly to Buckingham Palace on multiple occasions, but the palace sat on it. Every single action ever taken against Andrew came only after public outrage made silence more dangerous than exposure. The 2019 withdrawal from public duties after Andrew's disastrous BBC Newsnight interview came because the public demanded it. Andrew had sat in front of a camera and told the world he had absolutely no recollection of ever meeting Virginia, the woman who accused him of having unwanted intimate contact with her when she was only 16. The public did not believe a single word of it. And the stripping of his titles in 2025 came because Virginia had already taken her own life by then. She never got to see justice. And the memoir she left behind after her death landed with such devastating detail that the palace could no longer keep Andrew's name clean no matter how hard they tried. Royal author Andrew Loney, who had spent years digging into the House of York, said publicly that the palace may have been complicit in perverting the course of justice and that Charles should step down from the throne. American Congressman Ro Khanna, who co-authored the Epstein Transparency Act, went even further and said that stripping Andrew of his title was nowhere near sufficient, and that Charles owed the public a direct and honest accounting of exactly what he knew and precisely when he knew it. The public was already screaming that question at Charles. On October 27, 2025, Charles had come to Lichfield Cathedral in Staffordshire for a walkabout. He was there to meet community groups, volunteers, and well-wishers. Thousands of people had lined the streets to cheer for him. It was supposed to be a warm, positive public appearance. And then one man broke through all of it and screamed directly into Charles's face, demanding to know how long he had known about Andrew and Epstein, and whether he had asked the police to cover up for Andrew. Charles kept walking. He waved at the crowd, moved to the other side, and said absolutely nothing. That silence was more damning than any answer he could have given. A savant poll taken around that same period found that only 45% of British adults still supported the monarchy, a number that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. A YouGov survey found that 51% of the public believed the royal family needed to respond far more forcefully to the entire Epstein affair. The institution was hemorrhaging public trust in real time, and the man at the top of it was walking away from questions instead of answering them. To make everything even more painful, the arrest was ripping Andrew's own family apart from the inside. His daughter, Princess Eugenie, had cut her father off entirely, reportedly consumed by rage at his refusal to look any of Epstein's victims in the eye and apologize. Her sister, Princess Beatrice, was still in limited contact but was described by sources as crushed by shame and barely able to hold herself together under the weight of what her father had become. These were Andrew's own daughters, his own blood, and even they could not stand behind him. Within hours of the arrest, William was already in motion. He called his team and started building the response strategy himself, and the speed of it told you everything. This was not a man reacting to a surprise. William had been raising the alarm about Andrew for years. After the catastrophic BBC interview in 2019 in which Andrew sat across from a journalist and dismissed the accusations against him with a breathtaking casualness that horrified the country, William went directly to both Charles and the late Queen Elizabeth and told them that Andrew had to be removed from public life immediately. He told them that the monarchy's survival had to matter more than protecting one man's comfort. He was shut down. Queen Elizabeth, who had always loved Andrew with a fierce and protective devotion, refused to move decisively against him. Charles felt paralyzed between his mother and his instincts. William kept pushing until the walls went completely deaf. Now the catastrophe he had warned about had arrived in its most devastating form, and the same family that had dismissed every warning was now desperate for him to fix the wreckage. But as William took control of the crisis response, something was happening inside the palace that would pour fuel on a fire that was already burning. And it had to do with Camilla. While all this was going on, Camilla was on the phone. She was calling Sarah Ferguson, the ex-wife of the man who had just been arrested, pouring comfort and loyalty into a woman whose name was scattered all through the Epstein files. At the exact moment, the palace was scrambling to cut every visible connection to anyone touched by the scandal. When word of that call reached William, it did not read like a mistake. It read like a challenge. From that moment, William understood that the crisis threatening to consume the monarchy was not only coming from outside the palace walls. Part of it was sitting right beside the king. And he was not going to wait long before doing something about it. Charles became king in September 2022 at 73 years old. He was the oldest person in British history to take the throne. He had been heir apparent since 1952, which means he spent 70 years in waiting. 70 years of watching, preparing, and standing in the shadow of a mother who outlived every expectation. Charles became a grandfather before he ever wore the crown. No human being in the history of the British monarchy had waited longer or more patiently for the moment that was supposed to define his life. And then just 17 months after that moment finally arrived, cancer came knocking on his door. The specific type was never disclosed to the public, but the treatment began immediately and the physical toll became impossible to hide. Then, as if that was not already enough to break a man, came March 2024 when Kate announced her own cancer diagnosis following abdominal surgery and stepped back from all public duties for months of chemotherapy. Within 6 weeks, both the king and the wife of his heir were fighting cancer at the same time. The monarchy was bleeding from every direction at once, and the man supposed to be steering it was barely keeping himself upright. Into that gap, William moved. He did not arrive with speeches or press releases. He moved quietly, decisively, and with a focus that left absolutely no room for misunderstanding about where power was heading. The first visible sign came in 2025 when Charles handed William and Kate the authority to issue royal warrants, the official right to publicly endorse brands and products on behalf of the crown. This might sound like a minor administrative detail, but it was anything but. Monarchs had always kept this privilege locked tightly in their own hands. Handing it over was a signal, and everyone inside the palace read it clearly. But the warrants were only the beginning of what was being transferred. The real shift was happening inside the Andrew crisis, and it was moving fast. Over the 6 months leading up to the February 2026 arrest, William had become the person making every major decision involving Andrew. The removal of his titles in October 2025, the carefully engineered eviction from Royal Lodge, every public statement that came out of the palace about the matter had William's fingerprints all over it. One royal source told the News International that Charles was actively guiding William to make wise choices, knowing the future of the monarchy rested entirely with the Waleses. But strip away the diplomatic language, and what that actually meant was this: Charles had stopped leading. He was being carried. William's approach to the monarchy was also something entirely new, and it was making the old guard deeply uncomfortable. Where Charles had always operated through tradition, instinct, and a deeply personal attachment to ceremony and continuity, William was approaching the institution like a chief executive who had inherited a company in crisis. He wanted clear reporting structures, professional accountability, and zero tolerance for anyone inside the organization who was creating reputational damage. William had already demonstrated this through the way he ran his royal foundation, the charity he operates with Kate, which functions with a chief executive, a formal board of directors, published goals, and regular public updates. He intended to bring that same model to the monarchy itself. One former royal aide described William's management style with a single word: relentless. He questioned everything. He challenged long-standing practices that nobody else dared to touch. And he made clear to everyone around him that the days of powerful courtiers making decisions behind closed doors with no accountability to anyone were finished. And what all of this was doing to Charles as a man, not as a king but as a human being, was something far darker than any official source was ever willing to admit. A Radar Online insider said the Andrew situation had become almost too much for Charles to bear, and that his health had deteriorated specifically because of the crushing weight of it. He had reportedly told those closest to him that he felt completely betrayed by Andrew, that he had been lied to by his own brother, and that he feared he might never speak to Andrew again before one of them was gone. Just think about what that means for a moment. Charles waited 70 years for the crown. He dreamed of a reign that would be his legacy, his great contribution to the institution he had given his entire existence to. And instead, his reign was being defined by a criminal. Brother, a body slowly surrendering to disease, unanswered questions about his own role in the cover-up, and a son who had quietly walked into the room and taken over while Charles was still sitting in it. And then came the detail that very few people outside the palace are talking about openly. An official abdication plan is being rehearsed in private. Insiders told New Idea magazine in May 2026 that the rehearsals were already underway behind closed doors, modeled on the abdication of Denmark's Queen Margrethe in 2023, which had been handled with a smoothness and dignity that the British palace was now trying to replicate. A senior courtier told journalist Rob Shooter in March 2026 that when Charles steps back, it will look measured and dignified, with his health used as the explanation because it is the one reason the public simply cannot argue with. But then came the sentence that ripped the dignity out of every carefully chosen word before it. William had already taken on so much that the abdication, when it finally happened, would simply be the paperwork confirming a handover that had already taken place. That is the reality that the palace's carefully managed public image is sitting on top of. The ceremony will come. The cameras will be there. The world will watch and call it graceful. But inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, everyone already knows the truth. The transfer did not happen on the day of the announcement. It happened in strategy sessions, crisis calls, and quiet, unremarkable moments when a dying king stopped making decisions and a future king started making them instead. For most of the 90s and the early 2000s, Camilla was the most despised woman in Britain. She was the other woman. She was the shadow that had stretched across the marriage of the most beloved royal in modern history. When Diana sat across from a BBC interviewer in 1995 and told 200 million people watching around the world that there had been 3 people in her marriage and that it had been a bit crowded, the planet knew exactly who the third person was. And when Diana died in a Paris tunnel in 1997 at just 36 years old, the grief of a generation curdled into something ugly, and it landed squarely on Camilla. She even needed security for events that other royals attended freely. Camilla fought her way back through years of grinding, exhausting, thankless work. She married Charles in 2005. She took on charitable causes. She kept her composure through things that would have shattered most people. By the coronation in May 2023, she had clawed enough of the public's tolerance back to stand inside Westminster Abbey and be crowned Queen Consort without the country erupting in protest. By any honest measure, it was one of the most remarkable comebacks in British royal history. But there was one person who had watched every step of that comeback with eyes that never fully warmed. When Camilla arrived at Clarence's house for her first real meeting with William, royal biographer Christopher Anderson reported that she was shaking so badly she needed a drink just to steady herself. Camilla knew what she had done to this boy's family, and William stood there with his face completely still, giving away nothing. He had reportedly begged his father alongside Harry not to marry this woman. Charles had married her anyway, and something in William had never fully healed from that. A palace insider said it without flinching. The way Camilla had betrayed their mother had not been forgotten by either of Diana's sons, and William, being far more controlled than Harry, had simply been more disciplined about hiding it until now. The thing that finally cracked William's composure open was Camilla's loyalty to Sarah Ferguson. The two women had been close since the 1970s, before either of them had ever set foot inside a palace. To Camilla, this was a friendship that had nothing to do with the institution and everything to do with decades of personal history. To William, it was a catastrophic liability at the worst possible moment in the monarchy's recent history. Sarah Ferguson's name had been dragged through the Epstein Department of Justice files. In emails from October 2009, Sarah appeared to have contacted Epstein directly while her business was struggling, asking him for money. There was no criminal charge against her, but her name was in those files. Her connection to Andrew was undeniable. And in the middle of the worst royal scandal in a generation, Camilla publicly standing by her was something William was not going to forgive. So he delivered his ultimatum in late February 2026. According to Radar Online, William told Camilla directly that the only strategy that made any sense was total and immediate separation from Sarah Ferguson with no gray areas and no exceptions. He told her there was no room for private loyalties or mixed messages and that every single person in the family needed to be completely aligned. Imagine being Queen Consort and being spoken to like that by a man who is not yet king. Camilla reportedly erupted. She told Charles that William had massively overstepped his position, that he was not the monarch, and that he had no right to issue ultimatums to her as though she were a junior member of staff. And then came the moment that must have felt like the floor dropping out from under her. Charles, the man she had sacrificed decades of her life for, the man she had endured hatred and humiliation and public destruction for, looked at her and chose his son. As if that was not already enough to break Camilla, what happened next finished her in the court of public opinion in a way she never recovered from. In February 2026, Camilla attended an official engagement and met Giselle Pellicot, the French woman whose husband had secretly drugged her repeatedly over the course of years and invited dozens of men to take advantage of her while she lay completely unconscious. Pellicot had become a global symbol of raw courage by choosing to make her case entirely public. Camilla stood beside her and positioned herself in front of the cameras as a passionate supporter of abuse survivors. The backlash that erupted was unlike anything the palace had seen in years. Social media reactions were fast and furious. How, people demanded, could the Queen publicly hold the hand of a rape survivor while privately refusing to distance herself from the ex-wife of a man arrested for enabling a convicted pedophile? And behind closed doors, William had already told his team something that every person inside the palace understood was not really about Andrew at all. He said that anyone who brought scandal to the monarchy, regardless of their relationship to him personally, would be removed. That word did not need any further explanation. Everyone in that building knew exactly who it was aimed at. In the immediate hours after Andrew's arrest, Kate moved into crisis management like she had been waiting for exactly this moment. She was coordinating directly with legal advisors on how to shape the palace's public response. She was inside strategy meetings with senior palace staff. Sources from the National Examiner confirmed that Kate was working relentlessly to contain the damage and that Camilla's reaction to this was immediate and ferocious. She felt that Kate's visible active involvement was screaming to the world that she and Charles were incapable of managing their own institution. One insider described Camilla's position with brutal clarity. She had never liked Kate getting involved. Their relationship had always been difficult. And now Camilla was telling people around her that Kate was deliberately making her and Charles look weak and helpless in front of the entire world. Charles responded by defending Kate every single time it came up, telling Camilla that Kate was only trying to help. And Camilla, according to sources, was visibly furious every time Kate walked into a room. What was making this even more unbearable for Camilla was the simple and undeniable reality of public perception. Kate was magnetic in a way that Camilla simply was not. And everyone inside the palace could feel it. When they appeared at events together, The cameras found Kate. When they walked into rooms together, the conversation found Kate. Camilla had worked for years to build a warm and credible public image, and she had succeeded in making herself respected. But respect and adoration are not the same thing, and the public's relationship with Kate was something closer to adoration. During the Trump state visit, insiders reported that Donald Trump himself spent most of his time at official engagements directing his conversation toward Kate, leaving Camilla at the edge of exchanges she was supposed to be leading. A guest present told insiders that the contrast between the two women was so obvious that everyone in the room registered it. Camilla registered it most of all, and the fury she carried out of that visit reportedly went straight back into the palace and straight toward Kate. The truth was that this war had been building long before Andrew's arrest gave it a detonator. And the single moment that transformed it from a cold tension into something openly hostile happened when Camilla allegedly gestured at Kate to leave the room during a private exchange with Melania Trump. Palace staff witnessed it, and the story spread through courtier circles like fire through dry paper. What had been a difficult but managed rivalry became from that moment forward what insiders described as open warfare that had grown almost impossible to contain. Kate did not retreat. Her allies took the fight directly to Camilla. Senior courtiers described growing alarm that people in Kate's circle were painting the picture of her future reign so boldly and publicly that they were actively shoving Camilla out of the frame while Camilla was still the sitting queen consort. A palace aide described the situation with the kind of honesty that very rarely makes it out of those walls. Kate was comfortable, popular, and increasingly decisive, and Camilla was watching it and feeling herself being eroded, not just in public, but in her private conversations with the king. Another source said that what was happening felt like the most vicious clash between two senior royal women in living memory, and that neither of them was going to step back quietly. And then came the detail that should have destroyed Camilla completely, but that most people outside the palace still do not fully know. Charles had gone to William privately and asked him, as a father asking a personal and deeply painful favor of his son, to allow Camilla to find her own place within the monarchy after he was gone. He asked William to leave her alone, to let her have some dignity. William reportedly agreed. But here is what that agreement actually meant. The terms were entirely William's to define. Camilla's future access to the institution, her funding, her standing, her relevance within the royal family would all exist only as long as William allowed them to. And with Kate already functioning as the real power center of the new monarchy in everything but official title, sources said Camilla was watching the entire architecture of her future being designed by the two people who resented her most deeply. A Radar Online source said it without a single softening word. When William takes the throne, Camilla will effectively be at Kate's mercy. Sit with that for a moment. The woman who endured 2 decades of the public calling her a homewrecker to her face. The woman who fought her way back from the wreckage of Diana's death. The woman who stood inside Westminster Abbey and was crowned queen consort in front of the entire world after most people said it would never happen. That woman will need her